In my mother's womb, you formed me with your hands, known and loved by you. Before I took a breath, when I doubted, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. You make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. There's a healing light just beyond the clouds. Though I've walked through fire, I see clearly now. I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. And you make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. When I doubted, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. And I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. You make all things work together for my future and for my good. You make all things work together for your glory and for your name. You're not finished with me. 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 When I doubted, Lord, remind me I'm wonderfully made. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. And I know nothing has been wasted, no failure or mistake. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay. You're an artist and a potter, I'm the canvas and the clay.
Hey friends, this is Dustin, and I want to welcome you to this week's sermon. Now, for the next couple weeks, we are going to be doing one-off sermons as opposed to a larger themed sermon series that will lead us, though, towards what we feel as a leadership team that God is leading us towards this Advent. And today I want to talk to you about a lesson that I learned while on sabbatical this summer. As most of you know, I worked this summer as a fishing guide, and I would row a boat downriver, and I would take people fly fishing for trout. Now, the amazing thing about this is that this is a lesson within a lesson. The larger lesson, I believe, that I want to share with you is get outside. There is something amazing that happens when we get out in creation and we can see the handiwork of God in every nook and cranny of nature. And that reveals something about Him and also about ourselves. And this summer, as I worked as a fishing guide, taking folks out in the water, I got to see creation each and every day. And the Lord spoke to me. He showed me things about Himself, showed me things about myself, and then even us broadly as His people. And it's one of those lessons that I want to share with you today, because I think this speaks not just to a generic condition that we as humans find ourselves in, but I think it's very specific for the season. We're right coming on the heels of an election. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We live in a culture where we're trying to figure out what's next, and we're going. And in the midst of all the worry and trying to find out what we're supposed to be doing, what I should be doing, how I can maximize my potential, how I can reach the full, all that sort of stress that progress pushes on us, kind of from behind and in front of us, that leaves us just exasperated, and exhausted. God showed me a pretty profound lesson by observing the trout that I fished for each and every day. You see, we were fishing on river, and as I said, we were fishing for trout. And trout have often been described by many people as lazy fish, but nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, as a species, they're incredibly wise. There's a wisdom and an intelligence that trout have that other, especially freshwater species of fish, just don't have. And these fish, specifically trout, as we're talking about, remember, they line up and they will face upstream in the river. And so the river, remember, is flowing downstream, and the trout are lying with their faces upstream, and their eating habits are really remarkable. In that, the river, as some of you have heard me describe before, is a conveyor belt of food. There's constant food that's just being pumped down this river. There's all sorts of aquatic insects that are just flowing down the river in specific kind of lanes that the current funnels them in. And the trout find those feeding lanes, those feeding lines, and they just kind of tuck in. Without moving too much, they just wait for that food to come past their face. And they just make kind of subtle, minute changes left and right. It's just turning their head this way, and they'll gobble up a bug, and they'll turn back this way, and they gobble up a bug. Now, does that mean that the only food is coming down is right in front of their face? No, there's food kind of everywhere. But the trout often don't go for that. Why? It seems to be that they've been hardwired to have almost an innate knowledge to know whether the energy expenditure that they will make for a food item is worth the caloric reward. I'll say that again. They seem to innately know whether the energy expenditure that they will make is worth the caloric reward. Now, what does that mean? It means that when these tiny little insects that are coming past the trout's face are moving past them, if that trout only needs to move its head left or right, it will gobble everything up along its way. But that trout seems to know that if that insect is even 6 inches past where they'll turn their head, they probably won't go for that. Now, does that mean a trout won't chase down a wounded, larger bait fish that's 10, 15, 18 feet out in front of them? No, of course not. They'll go for that. But that caloric reward merits the energy expenditure to go after that. And so while they have incredible eyesight and they can see their same food item out there that they would eat normally right here in front of their face, they won't go for it because it's a detriment to them. It's a net loss that they get. Now, what in the world does this have to do with you and I? Well, there's a remarkable scene that we read in Luke's gospel. In Luke's gospel, chapter 10, we read an account of Jesus visiting the home of Mary and Martha. Now, immediately on the heels of the parable of the Good Samaritan, Jesus is dining at Mary and Martha's home. And starting in verse 38 of chapter 10 of Luke's gospel, we read these words. As Jesus and the disciples continued on their way to Jerusalem, they came to a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. Her sister Mary sat at the Lord's feet, listening to what he taught. But Martha was distracted by the big dinner she was preparing. She came to Jesus and said, Lord, doesn't it seem unfair to you that my sister just sits here while I do all the work? Tell her to come and help me. But the Lord said to her, my dear Martha, you are worried and upset over all these details. There's only one thing worth being concerned about. Mary has discovered it, and it will not be taken away from her. Now, there's a couple things that seem to be worthwhile to unpack from this passage. First, I think it's really powerful to point out the kind of cultural, topsy-turvy, upside-down sort of orientation that Jesus projects upon the situation, that Jesus portrays as a possibility for our world. Meaning what? Well, in this day and in this time in Jerusalem, in Israel, in the ancient Near East as a whole, it was a patriarchal society. And only men were permitted to sit at the feet of the rabbis. It's an unfortunate cliche. It's a horrific cliche, but it's certainly one that was true in this time, that a woman's place was in the kitchen. And Martha assumed this is what we do. This is the cultural norm. And so Mary sitting at Jesus's feet was a huge cultural faux pas. This was something that would have unraveled the nerves of everyone around. Didn't she know that's not where she belonged? And so when Jesus says to Martha that Mary has chosen the better thing or the correct thing, it's not that Jesus is so much correcting Martha, although there is an element of that there. It's that Jesus is reminding everyone in that room that women have an equal stand with the men of that day and that time, not just for then, but for all time. And not just for women, that each and every person, no matter what your background is, no matter who you are, no matter what, you have an equal say to be at the same level as everyone else. Jesus is undermining the power structures of that day and acknowledging the fact that Mary, in her brashness to demand her right, her place at the table, was in the right. He was reminding Martha that you don't have to settle for the low ground in the kitchen. In my kingdom, in the economy of my Father's house, you have a place and you can claim it. And I think that speaks volumes to the cultural landscape that we find ourselves in today. That each and every person, no matter who you are, if there is any sort of degradation of your dignity in the systems that we find ourselves in, you have a right, you have a godly call to claim your spot there. Sorry, I got a little off topic preaching there for a moment from what the initial kind of plan for the night was. But I think that's something the Spirit wants us to hear. I think there's some folks watching this video that need to be reminded of this. You might, if you're watching this video, you might be a Martha, and God is calling you to step out and step forward and take a place that's rightly yours. Others of you are a Mary, and it might feel really alone, right? Like you're out there and you're kind of the only one at that point that's claimed justice and claimed the rights, and God sees you and God says, yes, 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 I'm trying to get more people to come along your way. I'm bringing more along your way. And there's others of us that are watching this video, and it's just been your inner circle. And so you might be thinking, who in the world does this Lady Mary, or does that person, or do those people think they are stepping out. This feels uncomfortable. And God's saying, no. See, I've created an economy for all people. And if you've been maintaining exclusive rights to it, you need to kind of break that up to let them in, because that's my heart. That's my call. And don't you dare bar anyone from having equal access to the things that I've created for them. So what does this text have to do with a lesson God showed me on the river? Beyond, I believe, the massive cultural, spiritual implications of that, I think that each and every one of us, regardless of who we are, can identify at least a little bit with the Martha in this passage. I mean, I know I have so often, and it's kind of what led me to needing a sabbatical to begin with. I had burnt out because I was constantly buying into the lie that I had to be doing things for Jesus, and I couldn't just abide there with him. Like, I felt like I'm wasting the life you're giving me, God. And so when good things are coming along, I got to go and grab them, much like the trout in that river, I thought. But when I started observing those trout, I found that the opposite was true. See, as I said a few moments ago, those trout, those fish seem to innately know whether or not the energy they're going to expend to go after that thing that is good and is food and is meant for them, whether or not it's worth the reward it will give to their body, the caloric reward. They seem to know, no, that's not worth my energy. And so I'm going to stay here. I'm going to wait because something better is going to come along if I stay here, and it's actually going to nourish me. It'll be a net positive for me and not a negative. It won't be a detriment. It gets pretty risky when I go after that. And in my own life, I don't sit and stay and abide in that place for the better thing. I'm going after every little thing that catches my eye. So often in my own life, I would see something that looked good and I would go 110% for it and never calculate or consider whether or not it was actually going to nourish my soul, my spirit, or my psyche. Just went for everything that looked good and go. And maybe that's just me, but I suspect that there might be someone watching this, someone part of our church community that might find themselves in that same spot, that you're tired, that you've reached your capacity and then some, and every single thing that looks good, you keep thinking, well, it must be of God. It seems great. I'm going to go for it. It could be how we orient ourselves to our schedules. We just say yes to everything that seems to be good or that we feel obligated to. And so very quickly we find ourselves tired. We find ourselves not having room for relationships that matter. We don't have time to really cultivate a deep spiritual vitality in the Lord because we're just going and going. We've said yes to every single board meeting there's to say yes to. We were on every committee there is to be on. We're just constantly going, and we're losing our humanity. We're actually malnourishing our spirits. It could be the emotional energy we put into our social media life, into the political discourse of the day. We see a post that someone makes that we just don't agree with, and we've got to put ourselves in there, and we start investing. We start getting so consumed with it that we don't consider whether or not that will actually nourish us, to invest ourselves, to pursue that argument or that debate or that dialogue or fill in the blank. I don't know what it is for you, and I could go on and on with lists, but for me, the Lord has shown me through something as seemingly as trivial as trout that we ought to, as he says, consider the cost. Is it worth it? Will it nourish me to pursue this and say yes to this and yes to that and yes to this? Or do I need to say no and hold back and wait for the better thing? Does it actually nourish my soul to run around and do all these things for the Lord? Or would it be better for me and thus everyone else to actually sit and abide with him? So friends, I know that was a lot. You probably caught how much that's impacted me and how much I've wrestled with it, how much the multi-dimensions of that passage have impacted me. I just pray that in something that was shared in this brief message, that the Lord speaks to you, the Lord comforts you, the Lord challenges you, and the Lord brings you closer into his presence and in his love. Thank you so much, friends. We'll see you soon.